I will give you everything. The billionaire's warning to his young virgin wife. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The storm pressed against the glass walls of the 72nd floor penthouse. Thunder rolled somewhere above New York, and the city lights below shimmered like 1,000 restless secrets. At the end of a long marble table sat Ethan Reed, 35, sharp suit, colder eyes. Across from him, Lila Hart, 22, clasped her trembling hands in her lap. Her cardigan was thin, damp from the rain, the fabric clinging to her like fear. Between them lay a silver pen and a crisp folder of legal papers. The rain hit the window harder when Ethan finally spoke. His voice was low, measured, the kind that filled a room even when whispered. "Sign it," he said. "Marry me for 6 months. I will pay every debt your father owes." Lila's breath caught. A contract marriage?" Ethan leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Call it what you want. My board wants stability, a wife by my side. You need money. We both get what we want." "Oh." He slid the papers toward her. At the bottom of the final page was one chilling clause written in clean black ink. No physical affection required. Lila stared at the line until the words blurred. Her heart pounded so hard she thought he could hear it. Her voice cracked. "Why me?" Ethan's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "You were recommended by the hospital's foundation. You look desperate enough to say yes." Her eyes glistened. "And if I do not? Then your father's surgery ends tonight," he said flatly. "The hospital will not wait for charity." Lightning flashed. The silver pen reflected its light like a blade. She swallowed hard, every instinct screaming to run. Yet the thought of her father gasping for air in that sterile hospital room rooted her in place. She picked up the pen with shaking fingers. Ethan watched her. "Do not misunderstand this, Miss Hart," he said softly. "I do not believe in love, and I do not need it. But I will keep my word. I will give you everything, except myself." The tip of the pen touched paper. Her signature bloomed across the line like a confession. Somewhere outside, the thunder cracked again, echoing the quiet collapse of two strangers' lives colliding under one impossible deal. The city woke to pale sunlight the next morning, but inside Ethan Reed's world, nothing had changed. His assistant, Claire, entered the penthouse with her usual precision, a folder in hand and a tone that carried no warmth. "The marriage certificate was filed at 9 a.m., she said. "Mrs. Hart has been moved into the guest suite as instructed." Ethan looked up from his tablet. "Good. Make sure she has everything she needs. But I do not want interruptions during meetings." Claire hesitated, studying him. "You really went through with it, sir? A 6-month marriage?" He gave a slight shrug, his expression unreadable. "It is an arrangement. Feelings are irrelevant." In the quiet after she left, Ethan turned toward the window. Below him, the city stretched endless and bright, yet he felt the same distance as always. Somewhere in the guest suite, his new wife was unpacking the few belongings she owned, probably wondering what kind of man she had just married. Down the hall, Lila Hart stood inside a room twice the size of her entire apartment. White walls, soft gray drapes, a king-sized bed that looked untouched. On the dresser sat a single note in Ethan's clean handwriting. "You may use anything you need. Dinner is at 7. Do not be late." She placed the note down gently, her fingers trembling. The marble floors felt cold beneath her bare feet. Every corner of the suite screamed wealth, but none of it felt safe. She walked to the balcony and looked out at the skyline. It should have been beautiful, yet all she felt was small. When 7 o'clock came, she entered the dining room. Ethan sat at the far end of a long table, the kind that belonged in royal portraits. 2 plates, 2 glasses of wine, 10 feet of silence between them. He did not look up when he spoke. "You may sit." Lila obeyed, her movements careful. She could hear the faint hum of the city below, the clink of silverware too loud in the emptiness. "How is your father?" Ethan asked without emotion. "The doctor said he made it through the surgery," she replied softly. "Thank you for that." "You do not owe me thanks," he said. "It was part of the agreement." Lila's voice wavered. "Does everything have to be a transaction with you?" His eyes lifted then, sharp and cold. In my world, yes. Silence again. She lowered her gaze, pushing the food around her plate. After dinner, as she stood to leave, Ethan's voice stopped her. Lila. She turned. He looked at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. I will keep my promises. I will give you everything you need, but do not confuse this with affection. Her chest tightened, but she nodded. Understood. When she returned to her room, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the city lights through the glass wall. In another hospital room across town, her father slept peacefully for the first time in months. Lila whispered into the quiet, "You are safe now, Dad." Then, after a long pause, she added under her breath, "I just hope I survive this too." Outside, the night wind brushed against the windows, carrying the sound of a city that never slept, just like the two strangers bound by a contract neither of them truly understood yet. The next few weeks passed like a silent rehearsal for a life that did not belong to them. Every morning, Lila woke to the faint sound of the elevator doors opening and closing, the soft echo of Ethan's shoes across the marble floor. He left before sunrise, returned after dark, and rarely spoke beyond a polite nod or a short command. Their marriage existed on paper and in photographs, the kind carefully arranged by his public relations team. Claire handled every detail: wardrobe fittings, event schedules, and lessons in etiquette. Lila learned how to smile for cameras, how to hold her chin at a flattering angle, how to look at Ethan with admiration when the flashes went off. But behind those smiles, there was only exhaustion. When the photographers left, she would slip off her heels and sit alone in the empty penthouse, listening to the hum of the city far below. One afternoon, while waiting for Ethan's car to pick her up for another charity dinner, she overheard two maids whispering near the hallway. "She is just a contract wife," one said. "Everyone knows it. 6 months and she will disappear." Lila froze behind the corner, her hands tightening around the small clutch bag. The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. That evening, the gala glittered with chandeliers and laughter. Lila walked in beside Ethan, her arm delicately looped through his, feeling every gaze that turned toward them. For the first time, she noticed the way people looked at him with respect, fear, and envy, and at her with curiosity, and sometimes pity. During the dinner, a reporter approached. "Mrs. Reed," the woman said with a smile too sharp to be friendly, "what is it like to marry one of the richest men in the country?" Lila hesitated. She could feel Ethan's eyes on her. The room seemed to hold its breath. "It is overwhelming," she said slowly. "But I believe wealth should mean responsibility. I am still learning what that really means." A murmur spread through the crowd. Ethan turned slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. For once, she had not followed the script. Later, in the car on the way home, silence filled the space between them. Finally, Ethan said, "You handled that question well." Lila looked out the window. "You sound surprised." "No. I expected something different," he admitted. "Something less honest." She turned to him, her tone soft but steady. "You do not know me yet, Ethan. You only know the version you created." He glanced at her then, really looking, as if for the first time. The city lights flickered across her face, warm, uncertain, alive. When they reached the penthouse, Ethan walked her to the elevator but did not step inside. "Good night, Mrs. Reed," he said quietly. She met his gaze. "Good night, Mr. Reed." The doors slid shut, and for the first time since their wedding, Ethan felt the strange echo of something he thought he had buried long ago, a hint of admiration, maybe even the beginning of respect. He turned away from the elevator, unaware that somewhere in the quiet of that high-rise building, their contract marriage had just taken its first breath of something real. Winter crept across the city, leaving the rooftops silver under the morning sunday. Inside the penthouse, the air felt quieter than usual. Ethan had begun working from home more often, holding meetings in his private office instead of flying out every week. Lila noticed the change, but never asked why. She kept her distance, as the contract required, though the lines between obligation and curiosity had started to blur. One cold afternoon, she entered the kitchen and found Ethan there alone, sleeves rolled up, reading a report while a kettle whistled softly on the stove. He looked out of place in that domestic setting, like a portrait of wealth painted into a humble scene. "You drink tea?" she asked before she could stop herself. He looked up, surprised by her voice. Only when coffee fails to wake me. Lila smiled faintly. That must be often. He poured hot water into 2 cups and pushed one toward her. You should try it. You look exhausted. She hesitated but took the cup. The steam warmed her hands. I did not know billionaires notice things like that. Ethan leaned against the counter, his expression softening for the first time. I notice more than you think. The silence that followed was not cold. It was careful, unfamiliar, but strangely gentle. That night, a storm rolled in from the Atlantic. The power flickered and then went out, throwing the penthouse into darkness. Lila was in the library when it happened, her candlelight dancing across shelves of unread books. She heard footsteps in the hall, and then Ethan's voice. Are you all right? Yes, she said. I am fine. He stepped inside, his phone's flashlight cutting through the dim light. The shadows softened the hard lines of his face. He noticed the book in her lap, his mother's favorite poetry collection. You found her books, he said quietly. I was curious, Lila replied. She wrote her name on the first page. Ethan took the book gently, his thumb brushing over the faded signature. She loved words. My father did not. He sat beside her, and for the first time, he told someone about his mother, how she had built the company's first charity wing, how she had died too young, and how the emptiness left behind had turned him into the man everyone now feared. When he finished, Lila said softly, Maybe you built walls because you thought love could not survive them. He looked at her then, eyes reflecting the candlelight. You think love is stronger than fear? I think it has to be, she whispered. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Inside, the silence between them broke. For a moment, the contract that kept them apart no longer existed. When the lights returned, Ethan stood up, clearing his throat. We should rest. Tomorrow will be busy. Lila nodded, though her heart raced. As she watched him walk away, she realized the man who once said he would give her everything except himself had just given her something far more valuable, a glimpse of who he really was. And that night, long after the storm faded, she found herself smiling at the thought that maybe, just maybe, something was finally changing. The next morning brought sunlight sharp enough to make the glass walls of the penthouse gleam. The storm was gone, but its echo lingered between Ethan and Lila. Something unspoken had shifted after that night in the library. He no longer treated her like a silent accessory to his image. He started joining her for breakfast, asking simple questions about her studies, her father's recovery, the small things she missed from her old life. At first, she answered cautiously, expecting his interest to fade, but it did not. He listened, really listened, as if hearing her reminded him that the world was more than profit and negotiations. Sometimes he even smiled, though it was brief and uncertain, like a man relearning how. Days turned into weeks, and Lila's presence began to fill the penthouse in ways money never had. She brought small touches, fresh flowers on the dining table, music playing softly in the background, handwritten notes to the staff thanking them for their work. Ethan never mentioned it, but Claire noticed. She is changing this place, she said quietly one evening when Ethan reviewed a contract. He looked up, meeting her gaze, and said only, Yes, I know. A week later came the company's annual board gala, the biggest event of the season. Ethan had planned to attend alone, but when he saw Lila stepping out of her room in a midnight blue gown, he paused. The silk shimmered as she moved, and for a heartbeat, he forgot the crowd waiting downtown. You look, he stopped, searching for a word that would not betray too much. Appropriate for the evening, she laughed softly. That is the closest thing to a compliment I will ever get from you, is it not? He adjusted his cufflinks, fighting a smile. Perhaps. At the gala, Lila was radiant, yet calm, her posture poised but not proud. When a guest spilled champagne on her dress, she laughed it off and helped the waiter clean it. When a shareholder mocked her lack of business background, she answered with quiet wit that turned the remark into applause. Ethan watched from across the room, realizing that she no longer needed his shadow to stand tall, and somehow, that made him proud. As the evening ended, reporters crowded near the exit, shouting questions about their mysterious marriage. One of them asked, Mr. Reed, are you truly in love with your wife, or is this still just a business arrangement? The flash of cameras froze around them. Lila looked at him, waiting. Ethan hesitated, then placed his hand lightly on her back. His voice was calm but firm. You can call it whatever you want, but I am beginning to think I got the better end of the deal. The crowd murmured in surprise. Lila turned toward him, her eyes wide. For the first time, she saw warmth in his expression, not hidden, not cold, but real. Later in the car, she broke the silence. "You did not have to say that." He looked out the window. "I wanted to." She smiled faintly. "So this is what honesty sounds like." "No." He met her eyes, a trace of vulnerability there. "It feels strange, but I think I could get used to it." Outside, the city lights blurred by, and for the first time since their contract began, Lila no longer felt like she was pretending. Something true had begun to take root, something that no contract could contain. Spring arrived quietly, melting the frost from the city's edges. For the first time since their marriage, the penthouse no longer felt like a museum. There were signs of life, fresh flowers on the counter, laughter from the kitchen, and sunlight spilling across the marble floors. Ethan Reed had begun working in his study with the door open, something he had never done before. He claimed it was for better air circulation, but everyone knew it was so he could hear Lila's voice when she talked to the staff. Lila herself had changed too. She no longer moved through the house like a guest afraid to touch anything. She read in the library, cooked simple meals when Ethan worked late, and even teased him about his terrible coffee habit. Ethan pretended to be annoyed, but he had started drinking tea again the way she brewed it, light and fragrant. One Friday evening, they attended a private charity dinner hosted by the Carter Foundation. Lila had suggested that the next scholarship fund should support medical students from low-income families. Ethan had agreed without hesitation. When the board members praised the idea, she gave the credit to him, but he shook his head. "It was my wife's proposal," he said clearly. "She understands what people really need." Lila glanced at him in quiet shock. It was the first time he had used the word wife, with pride instead of formality. After the dinner, they returned to the penthouse. The city was soft under the night sky, and a light rain began to fall. Ethan poured 2 glasses of wine and joined her on the balcony. For a while, they said nothing, just watched the rain trace lines on the glass. "You were different tonight," she said softly. "How so?" "You seemed human." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You make that sound like an achievement." "It is," she replied, "for someone who swore he would never feel anything again." His smile faded. "I meant it when I said that, Lila. I lost too much once to risk losing again." She turned toward him, her voice gentle. "Maybe that is the point. You cannot keep love safe by locking it away." He looked at her for a long time, the reflection of city lights flickering in his eyes. "You make everything sound simple." "It is not simple," she said. "It is just real." For a moment, the distance between them vanished. The rain, the city, the walls, they all fell away. He reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his hand lingering a second too long. She did not move. "Lila," he whispered, "you should go inside. It is cold." But his voice lacked conviction. She nodded slowly, stepping back toward the door. "Good night, Ethan." He watched her disappear down the hallway, her footsteps soft against the floor. When the elevator doors closed behind her, he turned back to the city, his chest tight with emotions he had spent years denying. Inside her suite, Lila pressed a hand over her heart, the echo of his touch still burning against her skin. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. Somewhere between his warning and his walls, Ethan Reed had started to change. And without meaning to, she had too. The next morning, the world of quiet warmth they had built began to crack. The headlines appeared first, bold, ruthless, and impossible to ignore. Billionaire Ethan Reed's wife exposed, contract marriage revealed. Lila froze when she saw the news notification flash across her phone. Her breath caught as she scrolled through the article. There it was, their private contract, every page photographed, every clause dissected for millions to read. The cruelest part was the tone of mockery in the comments. Gold digger. 6-month wife. He bought her like property. Her hands shook. She could barely breathe when Claire knocked on her door. "Lila," she said quietly, "you should stay in here. Reporters are downstairs. Someone leaked the documents to the press." "Zero. Who would do this?" Lila whispered. Claire hesitated. "His cousin, Martin Reed. He has been fighting for control of the company." This was his way of striking back. Before Lila could respond, the door burst open. Ethan stood there, his face pale with anger. "You need to tell me what you did," he said. "What I did?" she repeated, stunned. "You are the only one who had access to the papers. You wanted attention, and now you have it." Tears filled her eyes. You really think I would humiliate myself like this? Ethan's voice was sharp. I warned you never to confuse this with affection. Now the world knows exactly what this was a deal. Nothing more. She took a step toward him, trembling. And what about everything you said to me? The dinners, the laughter, the way you looked at me, was all of that just part of the arrangement too? His silence was her answer. Lila swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay composed. I thought you had changed, Ethan, but I see now that your walls were never meant to keep people out. They were built to keep you from feeling guilty. She slipped the wedding ring from her finger and placed it on the table between them. I will not be your shield anymore. Then she walked past him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. The elevator doors closed behind her with a final metallic click. Ethan stood frozen, the sound of her footsteps still echoing in his chest. Claire entered quietly, holding the morning paper. Sir, she said, Martin is already speaking to reporters. He is calling for an investigation into the company's ethics. Ethan's expression hardened. He used her to get to me, he muttered. Claire hesitated before asking, Are you going after him? Ethan looked toward the empty hallway. First, I need to make something right. That night, while the media tore apart his reputation and investors demanded explanations, Ethan sat alone in his office. The city lights reflected off the glass walls, cold and distant. On his desk lay the burnt edges of their contract, half destroyed in anger, half saved out of regret. He picked it up slowly and whispered into the silence. You were right, Lila. I never gave you everything. I kept the one thing you asked for, the truth. 0. Outside, thunder rolled again, echoing the night they first met. But this time, it was not just a storm. It was the sound of reckoning. Days turned into a blur of headlines, accusations, and board meetings filled with shouting. Ethan Reed faced the kind of scrutiny that could destroy empires. Stockholders demanded his resignation. Sponsors withdrew funding. Every screen in the city replayed the story of the fake marriage that had humiliated him. But behind the noise, his thoughts were somewhere else. He could still see Lila's face the moment she walked away, the quiet strength in her eyes as she handed back the ring. The world called her a liar, a fraud, a gold digger. Yet he knew the truth. She had been the only honest thing in his life. 3 days after the scandal broke, Ethan arrived unannounced at the Carter Foundation, where Lila had started volunteering again. The rain was pouring, just like the day they met. He waited by the entrance until she finally appeared, holding a stack of files close to her chest. Lila, he said. She stopped but did not look at him. If you are here to blame me again, do it quickly. I have work to finish. I am not here to blame you, he replied quietly. I am here to apologize. Her eyes flicked up to his face, searching for the arrogance that had once lived there. It was gone. He looked tired, older, stripped of every shield he used to wear. I know who leaked the contract, he continued. It was Martin. He wanted control of the company. I confronted him this morning, and the board removed him. That does not change what you said to me, she whispered. I know, he admitted. I was wrong. I let my fear speak louder than the truth. I told you I would give you everything, but I gave you nothing that mattered. The sound of rain filled the silence between them. Lila took a step back. Ethan, this is not about the company or the press. This is about trust, and I do not think you understand what that means. He nodded slowly. Then let me show you. That evening, the city's most anticipated event took place, the reopening of the Heart Foundation's new medical wing, a project Lila had helped design before the scandal. The media filled the lobby, expecting to see her in hiding. But when the lights dimmed, Ethan walked onto the stage instead, carrying a small envelope. He looked out at the cameras, his voice steady. You have all read the stories about my so-called contract marriage. Let me tell you something those papers did not show. That woman taught me more about integrity and compassion than anyone in this room. He held up the envelope. This is the last amendment to that contract. I burned most of it, but I kept this part. It says, no expiry date. Because what we built, however, it started, was never meant to end. A murmur spread through the crowd. The spotlight shifted to the back of the hall, where Lila stood frozen, her eyes glistening. Ethan stepped down from the stage and walked toward her. You once told me that love has to be stronger than fear. I was afraid of losing control. I was afraid of needing someone, but not anymore. He stopped in front of her, rain still clinging to his coat. So here I am, without a contract, without a shield, asking you for the only thing I have left to give another chance. The cameras flashed. The crowd held its breath. Lila looked at him for a long moment, her voice barely a whisper. "You finally understand, Ethan. Everything worth having cannot be bought." He nodded, a faint smile breaking through. "Then maybe now, I am finally ready to earn it." And for the first time since their marriage began, Ethan Reed felt something more powerful than wealth or reputation redemption. The weeks that followed were quiet, but full of change. The noise of the scandal faded, replaced by the hum of rebuilding. Ethan Reed, resigned from several public boards, turned his focus toward philanthropy and placed his company in the hands of people he finally trusted. He had spent years chasing control, but for the first time, he was learning to let go. Lila Hart, meanwhile, continued her work at the Hart Foundation, managing the new scholarships and community clinics. She avoided interviews, ignored tabloids, and focused on what truly mattered, helping the people who reminded her of the girl she once was. Yet, despite her strength, there were moments when she still thought of Ethan, his quiet voice on the balcony, his eyes when he said he was sorry, and the promise written on that single surviving page. No expiry date. One evening, she stayed late at the foundation office, reviewing grant proposals. When she finally stepped outside, the street was bathed in soft golden light. A small crowd had gathered at the park across the road, where an art exhibition had been set up under white canopies. A banner fluttered in the breeze. "The Art of Lila Hart." Her heart skipped. She walked closer, and under the first canopy, she saw them dozens of paintings, sketches, and photographs she had once made for therapy, for herself, never meant for anyone to see. Each piece was labeled not with a price tag, but with a word: courage, hope, forgiveness. Ethan stood by the final painting, a portrait of the city skyline at dawn. He turned when he sensed her behind him. "You always said art tells the truth," he said softly. "I thought it was time the world saw yours." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "You did this?" "I wanted to honor the woman who reminded me what honesty looks like," Ethan said. "Every donation from tonight will fund the medical scholarships you dreamed about." The crowd began to applaud, but the noise faded in her ears. All she could see was him no longer the man who hid behind contracts and cold promises, but someone entirely new. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a simple gold ring, the same design as before, but engraved on the inside with 3 words: "For everything, always." He took a slow breath. "Lila, I once told you I would give you everything, and I failed. So this time, I am not promising you everything. I am promising you myself no conditions, no contracts, no end date. Will you marry me for real?" The world seemed to stop. Tears shimmered down her cheeks, but her smile was steady. "Yes," she whispered. "This time, not for a deal, for love." The crowd erupted in applause as he slipped the ring onto her finger. The city lights sparkled like stars above them, and Ethan pulled her close, his voice barely above the wind. "I told you once I did not believe in love," he murmured. "I was wrong. You are my proof." Lila leaned against him, her heart finally at peace. "And you are my everything," she said softly. As the night settled over the park, the camera of life pulled back, showing 2 people who had once met in desperation, now standing hand in hand, free from fear, free from contracts, ready to build a future written not on paper, but in trust. Their story began with a warning, but it ended with a promise, one that would last a lifetime.